Welcome to this edition of Kelly and Company. On today's program, we're talking about perhaps the greatest NBA trade of all time with sports broadcaster Randy Urban. TV guy Greg David joins us to add a rose to the KellyCo Valentine's bouquet with the most romantic TV episodes of all time. I'm sure one of them is not an episode of the A-Team.
This is Kelly and Company.
Do yourself a favor and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Kelly and Co AMI on Instagram and Twitter. And welcoming in, before we get started here, Mr. Brock Richardson, host of The Neutral Zone. You can find that using your favorite podcast out there. Brock, welcome back. Nice to have you on a Friday with us.
Nice to be back, and I always love a little sports that we're going to get into, so appreciate it very much.
Joining us is a familiar voice in basketball media out there, Randy Urban, host for the Raptors and NBA 360. He brings fans, of course, exclusive insights into the Toronto Raptors and the NBA, as he's going to do with us this morning. Randy, excited to have you back on Kelly and Company, talking trade deadline to begin with. And buddy, should we start with what our dear Toronto Raptors did, particularly bringing Mr. Ingram over?
For sure. Let's first of all, thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate coming on and talking a little hoops every year. This was it feels like I think the greatest trade deadline session of all time. There were something like 60 players moved, which I think is about 1/7 of the entire NBA, which is pretty crazy when you think of it like that.
26 teams out of the gambit, right? If that's what I heard that number, that 26 teams did at least one trade. And
Kelly, you stayed. You didn't get traded, which is surprising.
I know some people are like now today thumbs downing that, but you know.
Yeah. So let's talk Raptors. The Raptors, they made a move. They got, of course, Brandon Ingram from the New Orleans Pelicans. The Pelicans, I guess he had given notice to them that he wasn't going to re-sign, so he became available. Obviously, their season has gone not the way they had hoped. They've had probably the most injury games lost in the NBA. I would say they were number one and the Raptors are number two. And so it kind of paved the way for this former all-star to become available. And the Raptors, you know, they went and got him. They had some contracts that were movable in Bruce Brown and Kelly Olynyk. And they're bringing back a 20 points per game scorer and a real talent off the dribble. He's a spot-up shooter. He's got that mid-range game. Of course, he spent some time with the Lakers too. This kid can score. So for me, this is a good move for the Raptors. Now, there's been some criticism because he doesn't really fit the timeline that they're saying, or you know, media people are saying that. But look, he's injured right now. I'm not sure how much he's going to play this year. He comes back healthy. You've got whatever draft pick they get. You've got Scotty Barnes. You got Brandon Ingram. You got RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley. That's a pretty great, and Jakob Poeltl, that's a pretty great starting five right off the bat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I mean, the Raptors, I'm glad to see them do something for sure. Let's talk about the big trade that occurred. And this was the trade for Luka and Anthony Davis. And talk to me about that one. That one was the big one that came out where everyone seemed a little surprised.
Yeah, surprised is an understatement. I think I got a text from Teresa Resch, who's the new president of the Toronto Tempo, the women's WNBA team that's coming next year, and she asked me, she's like, "Is this real?" I'm like, I don't know. I just got home. I'm gonna check it out. We were both trying to figure out if Shams had been hacked, if Bleacher Report had been hacked. But once you see it on Bleacher Report, it's usually pretty legit. And when I saw that, I'm like, oh my goodness, I think this is real. It was a shock. I still think it's a shock. It hasn't really set in. I think once you see him actually play a game, it's going to really set in there. But it just reminds you that nobody is untradeable in the NBA. Maybe Steph Curry, but I thought Luka Doncic was untradeable. Yeah. I'm not sure if Dallas. Look, I think Dallas got better in some aspects. They got better defensively. They maybe got better in the short term. Maybe Anthony Davis pairs a bit better with Kyrie, and they have a pretty strong roster outside of those guys already. And it allows Anthony Davis as well to play the 4, which is what he wants. They've got Derek Lively playing the 5. So this could be good for Dallas in the short term. But you're talking about a guy in Doncic that's 25 years old, that when you look at his first 6 or 7 years in the league, his numbers are just as good, if not a little bit better, than LeBron James's first 6 or 7 years. So it is very difficult to make a trade like that, but they're going for it.
Yeah. They're going to have a couple of guys on LA that really can whine and get themselves that attention. I mean, this being done in a bubble, like it was with Rob Pelinka from LA, that was so surprising in itself.
Very weird. Yeah, very weird. I know that, I don't know how you guys would feel, but I would like to see what other players would be available if you started flaunting, dangling Luka Doncic as a franchise guy that some other team could get. I like Anthony Davis. I think he can be, when he's healthy, a top 10 talent in the NBA, but I don't love the durability of his career, and so when I look at that, he's also older. When I look at that, I'm like, it's a risk as well for Dallas. So I would have liked to have seen what else was out there.
Yeah, I
Brock,
agree.
did you have a question? Sorry, I thought you were going to comment.
I was just gonna say, were you surprised at the fans' reaction with this whole Doncic trade, particularly in Dallas? Because they were having protests and coffins and the whole thing. Were you surprised by their reaction, or is that just a product of the fan base just being as surprised as the rest of us?
Yeah, I guess I wasn't surprised. Fans are pretty innovative now. To bring a coffin in front of the the arena is pretty hilarious, to be honest. But I guess I'm not surprised, because I really look at Luka Doncic as a generational talent. In people around the league that I talk to, there's basically 5 to 7 players that if you put on a team and it doesn't matter who else is around them, they're going to battle for one of the top playoff spots. And Luka Doncic was one of those players. Giannis is the other. Jokic is one of them. I think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is the other, the Canadian.
For sure. Yeah.
So when you have one of the top 3, 4, 5 players in the NBA and you lose him, your fan base is going to lose their mind. That's just, they're now set up, okay, fine, for the next 2 years, but they were set up with Doncic for the next 10.
Yeah, for sure. I want to talk about a guy I would have loved to have seen in a Toronto Raptors uniform, the Fox trade. That really, I felt it coming. I felt that the Kings had to do something, and they did. But wow, what a trade.
Yeah, that one surprised me, because I didn't really know, what was going on in Sacramento that made De'Aaron Fox want to leave. This team was, they were one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the Western Conference a couple of years ago. They took a bit of a step back last year, and then this year even a further step back, when you'd like to think that teams are going, more of an upward trajectory. And maybe he was frustrated by that. Maybe he was frustrated with, he just didn't think that what he had around him was good enough to win. And so I asked around a little bit about what went on there, and I think that was part of it. And also, his wife is from San Antonio. And I think what came out was he was probably going to go there in free agency. And if that kind of information gets out, then, your organization has to make a decision. Now, Sacramento gets Zach LaVine, I think is a good, he's having a great season. He's a good scorer, but you're losing now Tyrese Halliburton. When you made a decision to keep De'Aaron Fox, you traded Tyrese Halliburton, and now you're trading De'Aaron Fox. So really, you've got no guards. Malik Monk is a nice player, and I think he's a starter, but I think he flourishes more in that 6th man role. They've got him starting now. Well, he is now going to be the lead guard for Sacramento, and I think they're just going to have to rely on more of their half court offense with DeRozan, with Zach LaVine, with Sabonis. They're not going to be more of this run and gun team that they were with De'Aaron Fox. I can't believe that San Antonio didn't have to give up Stephen Castle. I mean, this team is going to be great.
Yeah. At one time, this next deal we're going to talk about. At one time, I would have been happy to see Jimmy Butler in a Toronto Raptors uniform. Not so much now with 3 suspensions, with the Heat, and now he's off to the Warriors. Do you think this was a good deal, bad deal? Where do you sit with the Jimmy Butler situation that now seems to be settled?
Yeah, I think it had to be done. I think it satisfies Golden State's appetite for maybe one more run or half run. I think Jimmy Butler, I agree with you, Brock. Like I would have loved to see Jimmy Butler at some point in his career as a Toronto Raptor. I think he would have fit so well with this organization, with the fan base as a worker, as a guy that plays more often than not the right way. It's unfortunate the way it ended in Miami.
Yeah,
I don't
sure.
know exactly the details, so it's hard to comment on, who's right, who's wrong. But as a player, there are few better than Jimmy Butler. When he made that run in the playoffs a couple of years ago with the Miami Heat, you're thinking to yourself, this guy was not an all-star this season, but yet he's one of the top 3 or 5 players in the NBA right now, when you look at what he's doing in the playoffs. And so I don't know if he can get to that level again with Golden State, but I think we're going to see a really motivated Jimmy Butler, and Golden State needed to do something. Look, their window is basically this year, I think. They're getting older. Draymond Green's getting older, and as great as Steph Curry is, he is getting older too. And we all know, guys, Father Time has not lost.
We're seeing so many different people now in the league. Younger people, and they're really flourishing. And even at the beginning of what we talked about, if this person's healthy, because there's so many, we'll joke about all the injuries with the Raptors. There's so many glass players out there. KD didn't get moved. Anything else in closing that we want to touch on, Randy? Do you need to go back to the Raptors? I think that time frame people are looking at really is next year.
You know what? Going back to KD first, and then I'll finish with the Raptors. Yeah, KD. Hearing that he was on the way out is really interesting to me. They went all in, and then 1.5 seasons later, they're about to give up. It's just so strange what's happening in Phoenix. But we'll see if they can make a run. He's still one of the top scorers of all time in the NBA. And I still believe in KD even at 34 years old. But yeah, the Raptors, it seems like this sort of move speeds up the rebuild. And if they settle into a really top pick in this year's draft, you're talking about 3 or 4 guys at the top of that draft that are franchise changers. This is a really, really strong draft. So if you get a franchise changer at the top, you've got Brandon Ingram, you've got the face of your franchise in Scotty Barnes. If you're a Raptor fan, I'm looking at this super excited for next year. They are definitely a playoff team.
Well, you spent some time yesterday with Nasai, and it's just like he cannot tank. It's like some magnet pulls them away from the tank. Randy, of course, wonderful. We'll have to do this again down the road and catch up. Appreciate the time.
Thanks, fellas. Appreciate you having me on, as usual.
Randy Urban joining us, host for the Raptors and NBA 360. Really always wonderful having him on, always as we break down the NBA trade deadline. We welcome also into our program Nazreen Abdul-Majid, who joins us. Niz, welcome back.
It's good to be back. Happy Friday.
You betcha. And we're going to carry on with the show as usual, ladies and gentlemen. Stock Pretty Phil. If you want to reach out to us, email us at kellyco@ami.ca and call us at 1-866-509-4545.
Who says TV romance is dying? I don't believe it. And to help fill out the KellyCo Valentine's Bouquet, Greg David is here to discuss the most romantic TV episodes of all time. Welcome, Greg.
Thanks for having me.
When I thought of this idea, I couldn't pick a better person to bring on for this topic. So you did a little bit of research for this segment. Shocking, I know. You headed to stylist.co.uk to check out their list of the best romantic TV moments that will live in their heads forever. So what made their list, and would you agree with their picks?
I mean, first of all, coming up with a list, it's so subjective. I mean, if you look back at the history of television, is it really fair to kind of like say, oh, these are the top ones of all time? And that's what makes
Mhm.
TV so fun to talk about, because everybody has opinions. And I know that you've got some cool question coming up in the poll, but I want to talk about four that kind of resonated with me. And the first one is The Office Christmas Special Part 2. And so this is the original Office. This is the one that was created in the UK, and then of course there was the American spinoff, which I still haven't watched yet, and I need to, because
No way.
my TikTok feed is full of all the bloopers, so I really need to watch those episodes. But the original Office saw the romance between Tim, played by Martin Freeman, and Dawn, Lucy Davis, finally conclude. There had been that back and forth for 2 seasons of the will they or won't they, and Dawn was supposed to go to actually the U.S. with her boyfriend, and she sang her goodbyes to everybody at the Office Christmas party, and the song "Only You" by Yazoo starts to play, and everybody starts to slow dance. It's a great song from the 80s, by the way. Shout out to the 80s. I grew up in the 80s, and that was when the
Yes,
best music
yes.
was made. And Tim is just standing there, and out of nowhere, Dawn comes walking across the dance floor and kisses him full on the lips, just signifying their romance and that they were always meant to be together. And I just love that. I love that moment in the show for me. That just encapsulated their relationship, which was so great. Another episode that the website mentions is is an episode of The Last of Us, and the Last of Us is based on a video game, and it's all about
Mhm.
mushrooms and fungi taking over the world and turning everybody into zombies. So where the heck do you end up with romance in the middle of that?
That's what I
That's
was
the
wondering.
trick, though. That used to be the trick for me. Even not necessarily being a huge, oh my gosh, they're going to go into the romance. It'll be a slow episode.
Yeah.
But it's the creativity. Christmas was the same. Wow.
Yeah.
How do you wove
Yeah.
it in?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the case of this episode, long time of The Last of Us. So in and amongst all of the zombie stuff going on is one episode that tells the tale of this romance between Bill, Nick Offerman, and Frank, played by Murray Bartlett. And they managed to build this happy life together. Their house has got fencing around it to keep, strangers and zombies at bay. And it's just the evolution of the relationship. And you would think, well, why would I care about a couple, that's been introduced in an episode of the show of overarching themes? Well, that's the brilliant writing, and it's also the brilliant performances by both actors. By the end of that episode, you're crying, you cared about them, and you saw romance in a totally different way in the middle of this zombie show. So I just thought it was great. A little bit of Canadian content is in this list in Schitt's Creek and the episode Open Mic, and I totally agree with their pick of this because it's the relationship between David, played by Dan Levy, and Patrick, Noah Reid. It grows and culminates in Patrick singing Tina Turner's "Simply the Best" to David during an open mic night at the Apothecary. This went viral after this episode aired. People were downloading Noah Reid, who is a singer-songwriter in his own right. People were rushing to download that version of Tina Turner's song. I was one of those people that ran to do it. A great show that evolved from a fish out of water family into something much more. So I totally agree with that one. But the one that makes the top of the list for me is Friends, the one with the prom video. This is my favorite
Yes.
episode of Friends of all time. The hair on the back of my neck is going up right now because this is when Rachel learns how long Ross has loved her. There's a high school prom night video that shows the lengths that he would go, putting on his dad's ill-fitting tux to take her to the prom when it looked as though Chip, her date, wasn't going to go. And it just, by the end of the home video and all of the friends watching it as the adults that they were in that episode, you see that romance really bloom. It had been introduced between Ross and Rachel before that, but for me, that was my favorite moment of their romance, and everything, including that show, went downhill after that.
That broke my heart when I heard when I saw that episode, because
Yeah.
you could see Ross's face when she ended up going out
Oh.
and picking what's his name? Tim?
Chip.
Chip.
Yep.
Chip to prom. So it was was completely brutal. Just the look on his face. But yeah, it was so romantic. Would you agree, Brock, with this list?
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say too, when I think of that list, like the one you mentioned above with Schitt's Creek, like that's the episode that we just spoke about, which is what made me understand and know what Schitt's Creek was. Before that, I had no idea. So obviously that was the right thing for them. And as for Friends, I mean, the same sort of situation. When I went to see the Friends exhibit in Mississauga, they had that scene encapsulated in the exhibit in one of the videos. So I mean, obviously they feel that was part of their iconic moment too. So I agree with the bottom two for sure. The top two, maybe it's because I'm not as into the top two, but the bottom two would be where I would put at the top of my list for sure.
Yeah, I think one romantic TV moment was from The Office, the American one, and it was the Niagara episode where Jim and Pam had that secret wedding. It was pretty nice, and just the look that Jim had when he saw Pam on their wedding day, and it was just so iconic. It was so cute. Their whole relationship was. I'm not surprised The Office was on that list for sure.
So I'm curious, Greg, when you talk about bloopers earlier, how challenging when you have a show that behaves a certain way in some of these cases, some of these examples, and with Brock mentioning, hey, this is part of what they would consider their iconic episodes, I wonder how hard it is for the actors to make some of the shift. You know, I mean, there are shows we say, how the heck do they rope that subject in? But I'm sure for the actors, the writers, the people behind the show, this is one of our marquee because it's so different and challenging for us.
Yeah, do you mean from the blooper standpoint, or do you mean from
like
people,
I wonder
the
if you
discoverability?
see bloopers and stuff like that because actors are, hey, we're doing this for this show. Oh, again, actors are actors, but you wonder on when they look at it and saying this was a great episode, on not just the quality, the writing for it, of course it's different, but it must be when it comes to the bloopers, those challenges of, hey, this is so different than what we may normally do in some of them. And I don't know if you have a show that may come to your mind, an episode from some show that makes you stop and say, oh yeah, that was really the fish out of water show for them.
Well, you know, speaking from the blooper point of view, what is interesting to me is that, you know, if you're on social media, TikTok in particular, bloopers, depending on what you watch in your feed, you get to see them all the time. And for me, sometimes that's kind of my intro into a show that kind of, like, again, I just mentioned the U.S. Office, which I haven't watched yet. I've seen so many of the bloopers that I feel like I need to watch that. And I'll see in the comments, people say, what episode is this? And I need to check that out. So I do think that bloopers serve that purpose. The other blooper that I keep seeing are the Saturday Night Live breaks where members of the cast break, and it makes me want to go and search out those skits as well. The Beavis and Butthead one is the one that keeps jumping to mind. But yeah, it is interesting, especially when, you know, you see what takes me out sometimes is a dramatic actor, you know, breaking in the middle of an emotional scene. And you think, wow, how do they get back into that again?
Yes.
I would also throw into like the Golden Girls with Betty White, like that. With the bloopers with her, like that's where I realized, my goodness, she's in her 90s and she's still on point. So they would show on social media the cuts and those things, and those are the moments where you realize, man, these actors and actresses are really, really talented.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Brock. And even the show, even after Golden Girls, she was on that show, that Cleveland show, and I can't remember what the name of it is. But again, with Valerie
Hot in Cleveland or something?
Hot in Cleveland, that's it, with Valerie Bertinelli. Again, so sharp at that age, and seeing those bloopers and how much fun that is. And, you know, especially for the studio audience that are there watching that live. I mean, how much fun is it to see people mess up and have some fun at their expense?
Amazing. I know, and talented people, man. So we're gonna throw a Twitter poll question at you guys, asking you, where do you find your TV romance? And the options are classic romantic films, reality TV drama, soap operas, or rom-com series. So check out the poll. Thank you so much, Greg.
Thank you.
That was Greg David discussing the most romantic TV episodes of all time. Again, make sure to check out our Twitter poll question, and thank you.
And thank you, Niz. Really great suggestion for this topic, and Greg coming to the table, really appreciate it. And it was enjoyable listening to you guys discuss and kick this around. Really wonderful. Nazreen, you'll be back with us later next week on the program, but still out there doing a bit of social media when you get some time. Thank you. We will talk to you then.
Talk soon.
Mr. Richardson, you're back with us in a couple of weeks, and there we did it. We even got your sports in today before the romantic TV shows.
Thank you. I always appreciate it.
Brock Richardson, you can catch him. He's the host of The Neutral Zone. You can find that podcast for you available online, of course. Just subscribe. I'm sure, like us, these guys would appreciate a rating and review. And you can also find our podcast available to you. Subscribe and check us out on YouTube, where there's all sorts of great content available to you, hanging out there. We'd also wouldn't mind you subscribing to our YouTube page when you have time. On our next program, JJ Hunt is with us, and he's going to be describing his most memorable night market feast. Yummy! Taking us from the streets of Thailand to the local cuisines of Mexico. As usual, taking us on a very descriptive journey, JJ Hunt, when he's here with us on the next Kelly and Company on Monday. Hopefully you can be with us too. Now, get out of here, will ya?
Thanks for tuning in to Kelly and Company. Follow us on all social media, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more.